God, I wish I had a Halloween episode this year. It was the one tradition I'd never managed to break, yet still knew I'd run out of steam for that one fairly fast. If you're digging some Halloween MMO goodness, I'll just put some links to my past episodes in the description. However, this year, since Lifeless was barely out of alpha stage and was only worthy of a side quest preview, and many of the promising horror MMOs that we'd seen were either DOA or just mere phantoms in the mist with no solid release date, I decided to look at something that's almost as scary. Another Ubisoft game. So, due to Ubisoft's monthly giveaways and the odd timing of all of it, I decided that this would work. Kinda. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at The Crew. The Crew is an open-world MMO racing/driving game made by the ever-creative Ubisoft. If you ever thought there was too much walking in Ubisoft the game, here's a version with cars that came out in 2014. However, due to Ubisoft's 30-year anniversary giveaways and a recent DLC pack, there was a slight resurgence of interest in this title, and I figured, whatevs. While some other reviewer friends of mine might see this game as a horror title in its own right, regarding his experience with the community and customer service, let's just see if the years have been kind, and if this far less weeby version of Drift City will have some kind of merit for racing fans. The game certainly looks good, though this extends beyond simple high-quality textures and good lighting. There's a surprising amount of detail work put into the visuals, giving everything a more realistic feel, even if the physics will try its hardest to rip you back out of that immersion. You can expect to see dust and dirt collecting along the sides of your vehicle when you're driving off-road, and a rather immersive in-the-driver's seat view that's almost unplayable for many missions, but we'll get into that later. In essence, the entire game is going for a grounded and realistic look, including having someone actually driving the vehicles instead of the typical ghost car syndrome that you'll see in racing games. More on this in gameplay, though, as it brings to light something very odd for an MMO. Though, in keeping with this realistic style, the game finally added in some randomized weather effects, but amusingly it has these as a major selling point for the game's DLC, known as Wild Run. Thankfully, that was just poor wording, as everyone with the base game will see the various weather effects and not just those with Wild Run. There's some downsides though, with the biggest being super pedestrians able to leap out of the way of speeding cars, sometimes going into buildings and other times into other cars. The usual issue of having NPC vehicles spawning out of what seems to be nowhere in front of you, the physics engine taking a smoke break and allowing end-over-end flips from clipping a guardrail, and you can find plenty of things that will just rip you right back out of the experience. That's Ubisoft quality. This game contains the usual selection of licensed tracks that can be found in various radio channels, as well as the game's official soundtrack. Said soundtrack is being used for this video, and it's one of the more interesting and eclectic things I've listened to in a good while. Depending on what you're listening to, it can be a mishmash of techno, orchestrations, guitar, dubstep, and traditional music with heavy drum beats. It's worth a listen to on its own, and you can select to use it in the game in place of the standard radio stations. It wouldn't be a Ubisoft game without the typical bugs the company has become infamous for. A particularly nasty one is that the game can actually force your microphone down to almost inaudible levels, and while it's been reported as a bug for years, has yet to be fixed. While I definitely had the issue, a few members of Grindstone, including showwriter Dresker, did not have this issue. But I was afflicted with it so badly that many of the streams of the game were met with me rampantly swearing while I was trying to fix it each time we played. That's Ubisoft quality. Oh, god damn it! Amusingly, the hurdles of audio carry over to the game's voice work as well, with some predictably awkward results. I suppose it wouldn't be Ubisoft without having stilted dialogue and pacing, but many of the performances will end up reaching my cousin can do an accent level of hilarity. Meanwhile, the game certainly performs well in the sound design departments, with some rather immersive effects that can really draw you into the experience. Some of the cars will sound nicely powerful, and you can start to feel the sheer amount of speed you manage to rack up in these things. Starting out, you'll be forced into a single-player tutorial section, which simulates other players by having named bots driving around and acting special. This is where you'll be introduced to your character. That's right, you don't get to make a character, but instead everyone plays the exact same character. Alex Taylor, as he's known, will witness his brother being shot by another member of his game before we flash forward to Alex being roped in by the FBI to take down his brother's old crew. This is where you'll pick your starting vehicle, which will carry over into the open world. The real shame of this section is that it highlights the rather goofy story. It doesn't really teach you all that much that will help you when you're actually let out into the full game. While keyboard controls are solid, the squirrely nature of the more realistic handling of the cars will be far better suited to a gamepad of some sort. I found the game utterly unresponsive to a base Steam controller, as many games tend to think that thing is a mutant mouse-keyboard hybrid, but my third-party Xbox 360 controller was completely plug-and-play, going even as far as to change all prompts to the appropriate buttons once I've connected. I'd highly recommend a gamepad, as analog control is almost necessary, and even if the game is surfable without one, it just doesn't feel right. Once into the game world itself, you'll be granted access to the headquarters where you can spend points on perks, change out vehicles and parts, and to check out the store. While we do want to make one suggestion for new players, make sure to max out the perk Double Down as soon as possible, as it grants you a chance at bonus perk points upon level up, which will obviously be more useful the earlier in level you have it. Aside from the headquarters, you'll have access to more skill challenges, which you can complete to get upgrades for your vehicle, though don't be surprised if a challenge is far beyond your means, as they don't scale for your vehicle, and you may well require a better one to even have a chance. The current skill challenge types are Slalom, Scramble, Speed, Jump, Precision, and Raceline. Some of them do exactly what you'd expect given the name, others not so much. Slalom will have you swerve through highlighted points. Scramble, you'll break as many targets as possible. Speed, go as fast as possible for as long as you can, with collisions resetting your multiplier. Jump will have you locate a ramp to leap various distances. Precision requires you to drive perfectly between an ever-shrinking set of goalposts, and Raceline has you following an illustrated racing line as perfect as possible. Challenges will provide you with a rank of Bronze, Silver, or Gold, much like the main missions, and parts that are more powerful will depend on that rank. When you reach level 50, you'll gain the ability to shoot for a Platinum rank in those challenges, where you can earn a smart loot box to give you a random cosmetic or performance part. Race tuners will also come into play here, as the type of tuning on your car will result in the matching part when you perform that skill challenge. Tuners will unlock new specializations for your vehicle every 10 levels, assuming that particular model can mount them. These specs will include Street, Dirt, Performance, Raid, and Circuit, with each performing better or worse at various tasks, again usually indicated by their name. Each spec is a special level of vehicle though, so you may notice when changing spec that some missions will state that the parts you can win from doing skill challenges is just too low for the level of your current choice. Outside of these, we have typical story missions which all need to be completed before you can move to the next arc of the game's plot. These missions tend to mirror your various tuner choices with lots of racing, including drag races of a sort, speed challenges, and raids where you'll need to take out a rival vehicle, as well as sometimes escaping from police or rival gangs. You don't need to worry too much about having the appropriate vehicle for each one. If you do, fantastic, you get to use your own, but if you don't, the game will provide a default tuner spec vehicle fit for that purpose. The real shame of these is they tend to feel shoehorned in to pad out the gameplay, as often the mission's purpose ends up being, hey, this new unheard of guy thinks you're lame and he's challenging you, beat him in a race. It gets silly how this hardcore crime drama needs to revolve solely around driving cars. So the sore thumbs of the story end up showing through quite often. Yet, if you can ignore the shortcomings of the storyline, there's a decently competent racer and driving game here. It does need to be stated that you will find the usual Ubisoft open-world tropes, with lost cars abandoned throughout each zone for discovering parts, random missions, and most amusingly, towers of a sort. What could have made that last one infinitely more hilarious would be having to climb up a tower in a car, but here you just find special satellite dishes, oftentimes placed in areas that are so impractical as to be somewhat comical. Your reward for finding them is to then reveal all the goods that you could locate and do within a given area. Fair warning though, as the game suffers from a rather nasty case of rubber banding during races, and there's some other issues that you'll run into if you play with others, but more on that in community. The rubber banding issue itself is somewhat understandable, as it's more interesting to make sure that cars are always going to be a threat, but it can feel rather cheap when you participate in a race that you're leagues ahead of in terms of vehicle performance, and yet the AI will just keep up with you constantly. Let the AI manage to get a lead on you, however, and good luck seeing if the game will do the same favor for you. Pro tip, it won't. Now, a big note that the game will hit you with rather often upon loading is that a new expansion for the game has landed, and you should totally buy the DLC. There's even a story mission you need to complete, which gives you a brief introduction to the various new styles of tasks that you can play, such as drag racing, monster car arenas, and drifting. This also unlocks the aforementioned style of tuner choices as well, filling out an even larger roster and allows you to purchase and use motorbikes. came to a major disappointment to myself and Dresker as we both raced over to the motorcycle dealer to pick one up and try out the immersive first-person view with them, only to then be told that you need to buy the DLC or get out of the shop. The content is not cheap either, as it'll run you a hefty $30. It's up to you if you feel it's worth it, just for a few new mission types and the ability to get motorcycles. One thing that'll become obvious rather quickly is the game feels almost barren. We can't say for sure if this is due to a lack of players, or if there's just some sort of stealthy channel system we aren't aware of, but this is kinda useful since other players could mess up your skill challenge attempts. Should you want to group up with other players, simply find them in the world to get them on your previously seen list, or add them as friends on Uplay and open the party menu. There's a word of caution we must make though, as the difficulty of the story missions will scale based on whoever is the most powerful within your group. So even though you can group up with anyone, you'll really need to ensure that everyone is around the same power level, or only one of your party will be having any reasonable challenge while the rest of you get left to the dust. Since players are corporeal, or if I've used up your fancy word quota for the day, solid objects, it's entirely possible for any player to grief the hell out of others by chasing them down and ramming their cars off the road. It's a mild annoyance when freely driving. It's a ball-punching frustration if attempting to perform a skill challenge. Most of this game's player base seems to be at the endgame levels, so it's somewhat unlikely you'll encounter these types of players early on, even if, rest assured, they do exist. But for the most part, player cooperation seems to be forefront, with some players even being patient enough to wait in line for others to complete their challenges before they attempt them. Once progressing far enough into the story, you'll be presented with a choice to join one of 5 factions, with only 2 unlocked from the start. These act as your typical PvP choices and are used within the various competitive modes to earn special awards and bonuses. Don't fret too much on what faction you choose, as obviously you can change it later if one of your friends is dead set on being a snake while you want to stick with wolf. There's no restriction on playing the game normally depending on what faction you've chosen. Choosing a faction will allow you to participate in those faction missions, which will scale to the level of your character and not your car, so you can use them as a good source of XP and bucks. Faction missions operate like browser-based or Facebook idle games, where you can assign friends from the same faction to complete the missions for you over a period of time, even if they're offline. Sure, you can go and perform these missions yourself as actual races, but be prepared for the cross-country road trip of your life, with races that can take over an hour to complete in one go, span the entire continent, and feature no checkpoints. I don't even like driving for over an hour in real life. It would literally take me less time to hop into my car right now and drive to Baltimore or Philadelphia. More power to you if you complete these missions in one sitting. The cash shop is a bit all over the place with what you can buy and how. There's the obvious stuff like special cars from the various dealers, though these can come in 2 separate payment flavors. Some of these will require a straight pay X amount of dollars to own this car, while others will require the use of crew credits in various amounts. This means you'll need to make sure which of the 2 options of the car that you want is using before you jump into buying crew credits and find out you need to spend more by just buying it outright. Should you wish to purchase CC, the base option is 45,000 CC for $4.99, with larger purchases giving bonuses to the amount that you're given. Fortunately, when looking over the various cars, there isn't really anything that screams pay to win within them. There's no car that seems to stand out as being outright better than everything else. Each of the bought cars will have areas it excels in, and therefore what type of kits that you can use from the tuners, while you'll be locked out of others. Sadly, we do have to put up an air of caution when it comes to declaring this game is completely free of pay-to-win elements. Players do have the ability to outright purchase those perk points mentioned back in gameplay, and while you could earn these normally, the perks are very handy to have, so this is one of those instances of scale. To some, this will be completely unacceptable, while others won't see what the problem is at all, so it would really just come down to your personal taste on the issue and if it'll bother you or not. As mentioned before, there is DLC to purchase if you want to delve deeper into the game, and we've already seen the advertisements for even more DLC to come in the future. I guess it wouldn't be Ubisoft if they weren't spamming you to purchase the current or upcoming content. While this isn't entirely my cup of tea, the horror stories I heard about the game have been greatly exaggerated. Or maybe just improved since then. One of the two. I find the game a solid entry to an open-world racing title, and even if Drift City were still a thing, I'd place this heavily above that game, entry fee and Ubisoft notwithstanding. Here's my final rating. If you want the feeling of driving across an expansive open world, like no loading screen chunks, sectioned off cities, or anything like that, just get in your car and find a highway and head to the coast, this is the game for you. The crew is seriously impressive in that regard. We might have a very miniaturized and geographically chaotic version of the continental US, where New Mexico is to the north of the Grand Canyon, Vegas is where Salt Lake City should be, Long Island is the size of Florida, and Indianapolis doesn't exist, but it's still a very impressive feat, where you can spend a long time just driving around and checking out all the sights, and there's no need to stop for Angel Tier gasoline. With such an open map, there's a lot to do. Even if you just try to power through the main story missions, there's hundreds of stunt challenges, PvP options, faction missions, and the like, as long as you don't mind all of them coming down to driving around in your car. I might have gotten this for free, as well as anyone else who managed to snap up the giveaway this past month, but if you're out of luck and missed it, you're gonna have to fork over $30 for the title. It's not a bad price for the game, not that I would have gone out of my way to pay for it, but you'll have to buy it if you wish to give it a go. Of course, tack on the DLC and the price jumps by $30 once again. You'll likely experience your main fill of the game without the DLC, but if you really want motorcycles, you're gonna need it. Points also allow you to access premium vehicles, which offer up their own advantages and disadvantages, and might just boil down to how much you like a certain car manufacturer. Nothing really that screams need, at least. Ubisoft the game is a joke for a reason, and the crew fits that bill to a T. Open world? Check. Side missions scattered around? Check. Collectibles? Check. Vista-spanning radio towers? Oddly, check. Weird unaddressed game issues? Bigger check. There's just a lot of technical issues that have been around since launch that the devs seem rather blasé about fixing. Be it odd physics issues, effects that make no logical sense, or of course the strange microphone level adjusting bug, it's not without frustration. That is, if your PC can even run this game in the first place. In addition, though it has little to do with technical issues over actual gameplay choice, some drivers just might find the car's handling a bit too realistic for a game with such wacky driving tasks. Of course, while the community had plenty of opportunity to be complete jerks, it seems the game doesn't quite have a massive amount of players, and those left are either at endgame levels, harassing cars over there, or at the very least being decent and patient. It's just very unlikely you'll see a lot of them at once, and to some it'll make the game feel empty. Don't know what it's like over in PS4 world, but the PC population is sporadic at best. Next time we'll be scrambling for another title since nothing seems to want to come out of beta, so I might have another horror story to tell. Man, that thing won't be getting any views. Hey, once again, thanks for sticking around at the end of the credits and checking out what I'm going to be rambling about here today. Leftwind will take you to the last episode on Twin Saga, the latest entry in X Legend's ongoing Super Kawaii series. No, it's not what it's called, it's just a thing I do. Rightwind will take you to basically the closest thing I have to a Halloween episode this year, a 1v1 horror game which is basically Capture the Flag meets Five Nights at Freddy's, and it's not nearly as horrible as I made it sound. You might want to check it out. Of course, you want to keep up with show updates because the subscription box is being a giant pile of crap. You can go ahead and head to my Twitter with @ChaosD1, or if you just don't want to listen to what I'm saying, you can check out show-only updates at @MMO_Grinder. I also have a Patreon because that's a thing people do. Finally, while this is the place I'd normally be plugging Slipstream's show, I'm gonna let him take over for a bit and let y'all know what's going on with his show. See y'all in whatever the hell I'm doing next.
Greetings, MMO Grinder fans. Slipstream X14 here, the host of the No Tokens Required podcast. Back in April, the show was put on a brief hiatus, which then turned into a very long hiatus. During this time, Jason and Carl's personal lives affected their ability to continue on with the show on a regular basis. It's a bummer that they had to leave, but as they say, the show must go on. Over the last 2 months, I have been deciding on what the purpose of the show would be and the direction it should go in. So, after much deliberation, I've decided that until the podcast can get back on its feet, I'll be doing pre-records for our YouTube channel in which there will be a specific conversational topic at hand with either random gameplay footage or a game that is tailored for the topic. A lot of work went into growing the little fan base we had on Twitch, and although the show hit a rough patch, I'm sure that something good can come out of it even as a solo host. Who knows? It may once again turn into a podcast. Be sure to visit us at notokensrequired.com, which is our official webpage, or follow us on Twitter at NoTokensRec for future updates, and I'm looking forward to releasing the first of many videos very soon.